Hello, sweet listeners. You're about to hear an episode I recorded with Lisanne Cobalt Chrome about the famous horror film Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. This was a juicy 2-hour episode, and I'm offering the first hour free for your enjoyment. But if you want the whole discussion, you'll have to sign up for my Patreon at patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. And yes, sometimes I am starved for bonus content, so this will happen. So if you want the whole experience, definitely go sign up there or through Spotify subscriptions. But on my Patreon, I offer a whole host of bonus content, including bonus episodes, a newsletter with my recommendations of the month and reading, music, film, and kink, and live screenings with a chat attached hosted by yours truly. And I now have a Discord and a book club that's starting next month. We have our own little community on the server, and I hope you'll join us. That's patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. Enjoy the show.
You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
Sister, sister, oh so fair, why is there blood all over your hair?
Whatever happened to Baby Jane? To seek the answer to that question, we will follow a man plotting a murder. Highly specialized work. But Robert Aldrich has considerable experience in such matters. He has a dozen successful pictures to his credit. His stars are Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. The scene: an Italianate villa in a once fashionable section of Los Angeles. Its halls, once crowded with the bright, the beautiful, and the celebrated, now echo only to hectic whispers, the insistent call of a buzzer better left unanswered. A telephone that has become an object of fear. A supper tray that will not be touched. A window barred against the world. A hammer. A mute scrawl crying for help. From these elements, director Aldrich has fashioned a motion picture with a curious title: Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Bette Davis is Jane Hudson. Joan Crawford is Blanche Hudson. But we must warn you, if you're long-standing fans of Miss Davis and Miss Crawford, this motion picture is quite unlike anything they have ever done. It is a bold essay in the art of the macabre, a venture to the ultimate reaches of terror. A motion picture definitely not for the squeamish. And we beg you, as the tension builds to the screaming point, as shock after shock assaults your senses, try to remember that this is only a motion picture. Try and remember.
Get away from me!
No, we can't show you anymore. Only when you see whatever happened to Baby Jane will you know. And the answer is total suspense.
Hello again, this is Annie Rose Malamed, and you're listening to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. And today I'm here with my friend Lisanne Cobalt Chrome. Hi, Lisanne.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. We've been talking about having you on for a minute now, ever since we met when I was in New Orleans. So before we get into it, Lisanne, who lives in the spookiest city in America, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I am a Leatherdyke degenerate who lives in New Orleans, also known as Bulbancha. And I am an artist and a witch and a sex educator here. And Yeah, pre-pandemic, I hosted or co-hosted a monthly movie night called Queer Root Films, and our tagline is where we show our friends the movies that made us gay. And I put together this series with my friends Tylin and Sally, and yeah, we would just meet up at a regular location every month and show gay ass movies, and it was really fun. And we are kind of looking for a new home for it for when it feels safe to gather in person again. But that's obviously kind of like a little bit in the ether right now as we're kind of working on feeling more settled. So, yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I was once upon a time supposed to go to one of your film screenings, and back then we had talked about doing Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And I want to, before I forget, I think what would actually be better is if you spoke without holding it, because the levels are coming in too hot. So maybe, can you test it out now?
Okay. Yeah.
That's better,
So
actually. Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. I like made a big deal out of you holding it. Now it's too loud. Yeah, so that dream is finally coming to fruition. And today we are talking about Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, directed by Robert Aldridge and starring, of course, Bette Davis and Joan Crawford in one of the most epic horror films of all time. So, Lizanne, tell me about why you picked that movie back then. Tell me about when you first saw it, what you felt. I believe you had a performance art piece.
Yeah. So, when I was growing up, I wasn't really allowed a lot of current media. I don't know, I kind of grew up in a weird, kind of conservative house, but I think like a lot of conservative families with parents who were like very inconsistent in like what was bad and what was good. So pretty much anything of modern times, they were like, we're not into it, no. But it meant that I also wasn't really monitored in regards to like other things. So anything that was really accessible from like the public library or anything that would show on the like Saturday afternoon matinee like movie on the TV, things like that weren't monitored, and they were like, "Oh, if it's old and black and white, watch whatever." But that meant that I really just like watched everything. And my favorite was really like suspense and noir. And so I really kind of came up watching like a lot of old horror movies. So that is kind of my first love of horror. And then the first time I saw Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, I was probably like 12, and it was one of the movies that was being shown on like the Saturday afternoon old movie, on the TV. And kind of immediately I was like transfixed and became obsessed with it. It also started a lifelong obsession with Bette Davis, who is just fabulous. And also, yeah, this led to a very early performance art piece that I did unprompted in my middle school cafeteria. Um, yes, I have always been a bit much.
I mean, same.
Right? So yeah, this was like conservative rural Wisconsin middle school. It's actually kind of amazing that I didn't get bullied more than I did. um, but and I wasn't even thinking about it as performance art because I don't even think I had that term. I hadn't conceptualized that yet, but I knew that I was moved to make some art about it. And um God, I like wore this this leotard that was my mom's from the 70s, and this like long black skirt, and like the black purple lipstick that was like the Halloween drugstore lipstick, because that was what you wore when you were goth in the 90s, right? So this is like mid 90s, and I kind of came into the cafeteria twirling, dancing like Baby Jane does at the end of the movie on the beach. Right? So I'm kind of doing that like spacing out, twirling, like more childlike thing, and just start asking random people, but where's Baby Jane? Whatever happened to Baby Jane?
Oh
And
my
people are
God.
like, what the fuck? Right? And then at some point, I like climb on top of one of the tables and start like screaming, and like in a very distressed way, like, but whatever happened to Baby Jane? And like, yeah, I don't know. And it just kind of like devolved from there. And I don't really remember. I think it was mostly just ignored. But like, yeah, that was definitely, I mean, yeah, I was like, it's really no surprise that I am who I am today when I was doing that in middle school, right?
Yeah, that's pretty, pretty homosexual of you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I did shit like that too. Like, I became obsessed with the Phantom of the Opera, and I had like a Christine Daae performance that I did in school. I don't know how I wasn't more bullied. Also,
Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
so I completely get it. I believe I even tried to put on a production of the Phantom of the Opera at some point, and all of the girls were very annoyed because I kept giving them parts as men because I didn't want any boys in the play. So there's a lot of gay stories from my childhood where
Right?
I'm like,
It's just so
oh, okay. Yeah.
it's just so hard when you're tiny and gay and just like need to get it out.
Yes, absolutely. And you're seeing these like insane women on screen, and you're like, okay, that's me. Which I
Yeah,
think is what a lot of gay men did when they saw this movie.
hmm
I would assume most people listening to this have seen Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but if you don't know, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is a psychological horror thriller that pioneered this genre called hagsploitation. And Lizanne, you had also said that it was
Oh
called
yeah, I love the term psychobiddy. Is also another genre that it's kind of known under. Yeah.
Nice. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a subgenre of exploitation films in which over-the-hill, formerly glamorous older actresses were kind of poached because they could not land the kind of parts that they could anymore. They were kind of poached by these B movies to play these insane women who terrorize the other characters. Kier Lajanice.
Yeah, because
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, there's nothing scarier than a old ugly woman, right?
Yeah, what could be scarier than a hot old lady? I was also like watching this with my girlfriend. I was like, these men, when we were watching Feud, because the Ryan Murphy series, for those of you who don't know, is about the legendary quote unquote feud between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, and about the making of this film. And as I was watching this with my girlfriend, I was kind of just like, these men are so weak for thinking these women are ugly. Like, they're so gorgeous.
Truly.
Yeah, and sexy and powerful. So, anyway, whatever. Like, not everybody can be a lesbian, one of the most powerful beings in the world. Have you read the book House of Psychotic Women? Did we talk about that before?
No, we have not talked about it before, but I have, and Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course, that's our Bible. Keira Janice proposes in that movie that Sunset Boulevard is the real, like, genesis of this genre, which I would agree with. That's another favorite movie of mine.
Mine too.
Oh, yeah,
Love
it's
it.
so good. And we've had a lot of gay women on this podcast who idolize Norma Desmond, of course. Director Robert Aldridge paired Joan Crawford and Bette Davis to kind of like breathe new life into their careers, and it was a very successful formula.
Yeah, and I mean, I was shocked when I was reading up about this film to discover that even when this film was proposed, the studio execs didn't even want Bette Davis or Joan Crawford in the film because they thought they were too old. And I was like, so these women are in their early to mid 50s.
Which is
and
young, by the way.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
really young. And the studio execs are like, I don't know. They're supposed to be these like old scary crones, but I think these women are too old for it. Which is totally nuts.
Were they supposed to be 30?
Well, that's the thing, is that they had originally were proposing actresses in their late 30s, which was like already pushing it. But yeah, then Aldridge was like, actually, you're full of shit, and he was the one that really pushed to like make sure that more age appropriate actresses got the roles, which again is nuts to me that there even needed to be a discussion about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Feud, in the series Feud, it kind of portrays, and, you know, obviously Ryan Murphy takes a lot of liberties, but it does kind of portray Robert Aldridge as the least sexist of the men in this story. I won't go as far as to say he's like an ally to women or anything, but he's clearly like kind of disgusted by the other men around him and their bullshit. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I would assume that Ryan Murphy kind of culled from the actual things that were happening. So like Robert Aldridge pushing for these two older women would fit in line with that narrative. It's apparently the actresses' relationship didn't actually turn sour until they starred in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. Some people dispute that, claiming that the legendary feud started when Bette Davis got a little too cozy with her co-star Franchot Tone in the 1935 movie Dangerous, despite Tone being engaged to Joan Crawford.
Yeah, you know, again, in the reading that I've done about these two women and what was going on in their lives, yeah, I think that a lot of the earlier feud was just played up by the like gossip columnists, you know, trying to stir things up, and the studio execs who, you know, obviously always want you know, some sort of side drama to be happening because it gets people more interested in whatever films they're putting out. But I think ultimately, at least earlier, like before Baby Jane was made, I think it was really just the fact that these were both like really strong-willed women who were very career focused, and both of them like knew what they wanted in this career and like pushed to get it. And I mean, you know, also coming out in other parts of their lives, they've definitely both like had control issues, but I mean, whatever, that's what it takes to be a powerful woman, especially in that, you know, in that profession. So, you know, I'm not going to fault them on that, but I think it was mostly just, yeah, men around them trying to stir things up because they're like, oh, these bitchy women, you know, and they were trying to like point them at each other, because otherwise really these women were just like fighting with the men around them, and the men like couldn't handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds correct. I mean, it sounds like what it kind of in the book, about that the Ryan Murphy series is based on, called Divine Feud by Sean Considine. Have you read that?
No, I have not.
I only just started it, but it does sound like a lot of this was they were kind of pushed into hatred of each other by gossip columnists and execs or whatever. I did want to talk about Crawford and Davis's respective careers. We don't have time to do like a whole retrospective here, but I wanted to plug the podcast You Must Remember This, which is a wonderful film podcast. It has a very in-depth series on Joan Crawford, and as well as one on the rivalry between Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons. So check that out. Joan Crawford oops, sorry. Joan Crawford was born Lucille Fay Lesueur in San Antonio, Texas, which always kind of surprises me because that's such a stagey name. It's more stagey than Joan Crawford.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. To Thomas Lesueur and Anna Johnson on March 23rd, 1906, to which I said in my notes, is that an Aries? And you responded, Aries.
Yeah.
So they're actually both Aries. And I thought that was interesting because there is a movie called Sign of the Ram. Have you seen that?
No.
And it's very good, and it's from 1948, and it has an actress in it named Susan Peters who was disabled and using a wheelchair, and actually stars in the film as a disabled woman who is a very crazy, manipulative Aries. So I thought that was a very interesting connection just because of the two Aries women in this, and also there's so much about disability in this film as well. So I just wanted, I don't think there's any actual connection, but I just wanted to note it.
Yeah.
So Lucille fell in love with dancing, making it her lifelong goal to become a professional dancer, and she got the chance in 1924 when she was spotted by producer Jacob J. Schubert while performing in Detroit. And as her career started to take off, she changed her name to Joan Crawford, and she was contracted by MGM. Her career skyrocketed. She became a major star, cementing that status in 1945 when she won Best Actress for Mildred Pierce. She was a major star, but she was also kind of seen as like a glamour girl, like, you know, kind of a, you know, someone who does like melodramas and women's pictures. But Mildred Pierce was when she really gained professional acclaim. This success did not mean much, as misogyny against older women is rampant in Hollywood, so she thought that this would take her career to new heights, and it didn't really. As the rest of Crawford's career continued, she found herself in roles that saw her playing single, independent middle-aged women. By the late 50s and early 60s, her acting career was pretty dead, and at that point in her life, she was 4 years removed from her fourth husband, Alfred Steele's death, who was the major CEO of Pepsi Cola, and nearly penniless to the point of accepting movie roles that some fans would consider beneath her, and hence Baby Jane, whatever happened to Baby Jane. Yeah. So Bette Davis was in a very similar position. She was born Ruth Elizabeth Davis on April 5th, 1908 in Lowell, Massachusetts. So also an Aries, so clash of the Rams in this. Davis became interested in acting in 1926, and with a few years of studying acting under her belt, she auditioned for George Cukor's theater company in Rochester, New York. And even though Cukor was less than impressed by her audition, he still gave her an acting job as a chorus girl. And in 1930, Davis traveled to Hollywood for a screen test at Universal Studios, where she apparently failed miserably, but was kept on as a stand-in for actors during screen tests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that one thing that always strikes me with Bette Davis is that so much of like talk about her from both executive, like studio execs and like movie writers and critics alike, is that everyone always wanted to talk about how, like, make a point out of how not beautiful she is, which I think is also kind of crazy. Um, but they're like, oh, you know, she's not really beautiful, but there's just still something alluring about her. So I think that this is, for me, it's just misogyny and the narrow cultural beauty standard that really fucks with people's understanding of attraction. And so again, these people in charge were like, I don't know, this woman, she like looks kind of weird, but like I am still transfixed by her. And
Because
they're
she's
just
hot.
like, yeah, and they're just like so confused about it. And I'm like, why are you stressing so much? She's just like really hot and powerful. Obviously, you don't want to look away. Just like stop trying to fucking pick it apart, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And she was very known for her like bug-eyed look that she would do. She had very big eyes. Universal eventually cast her in her debut film, The Bad Sister, very on theme for this month. Believing that she had potential, the studio head Carl Lammel of the Lammel family renewed Davis's contract for about 3 months, only to cancel it a year later. Disheartened by the entire experience, Davis was mentally prepared to return to New York to continue acting on stage, which is also much more accepting of diversity in terms of attractiveness. This was her plan until she got a call from actor George Arliss asking her to take the lead role alongside him in the 1932 Warner Brothers film The Man Who Played God. And after finally getting her big break, Warner Brothers signed her to a 5-year contract.
Yeah, so she is best known for her unsympathetic and bitchy and sometimes campy characters. I think her very early films, they tried to make her more into a glamour girl, but you know, that was just not her. She wasn't really into it. She loved playing complicated villains and also was really into employing physical changes to her features to play like more in character. You know, like when she was like playing a sick character, she just wanted to look ill and would do like actually did her own makeup for the movies to like look even worse than was originally in the script because she wanted that realism. And so we take this for granted now with like actors wearing prosthetics or changing their body for different roles, but that was actually pretty rare at the time.
Yeah, that was part of her success in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, is that she's not afraid to look ugly. And that's why it's such a horrifying and shocking film. So Bette Davis rises to fame, and despite all the success Davis had earlier in her career, by this time, by 1962, it kind of had all gone away. Bette Davis was in the same predicament as Joan Crawford, alone and desperate for an acting gig. So, Lizanne, I wanted to ask you, how are these women different? And how are they the same?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think they are different really more in their kind of their methods in how they kind of push themselves forward. So Bette Davis was like known as being really combative with like everyone around her, really holding herself to a really high standard and holding people around her to a really high standard, but would just be really aggressive and kind of always push for the way she saw things, like that she thought they should be. And Joan Crawford kind of went a little bit more of a backdoor route. Like, she also, wanted to like pushed herself to be at the top of, her form and, really wanted things to be a certain way. But I think she did it a little more in like sweetness and manipulation to kind of get what she wanted ultimately. So they were, they both had really high standards and both were always pushing themselves, you know, to be the best they could be. They just had like one did it a little bit more from the side and one did it a little more aggressively from the front, I think.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking just of the roles they chose too. Like Betty Davis just wasn't afraid to play a villain. Like her most famous movie is All About Eve.
Ugh,
Yeah,
also,
where she won the Oscar, and it's because
yeah.
she's not afraid to just be a horrible bitch. Um, and Joan Crawford was a lot more controlled about her image,
Hmm.
even though, if you believe Mommy Dearest, which I do, she was probably quite abusive. So, I mean, they probably both were, to be honest, but it's Joan Crawford was very much about hiding that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and they both also famously had, you know, multiple husbands and multiple kids and estranged children and
Hmm.
children written out of their wills. And I'm sure they were both a horror to be around
Absolutely.
interpersonally.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah. Apparently, the pre production of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane initially went really smoothly, but the feud
Mm.
started when Davis suspected that director Robert Aldridge and Crawford was sleeping together. Davis only accepted the role when both Aldridge and Crawford vehemently denied the allegation. The bickering continued when Davis mischievously installed a plethora of Coca-Cola machines around the set that irritated Joan Crawford because she was married to the CEO of Pepsi Cola. So Davis knew this and just wanted to get under her skin, right? There was like a lot of rumors at the time that were really played up by the press about their fights on set. There were multiple instances of them in some way or another trying to harm each other. The first incident that occurred was when Davis allegedly kicked Crawford in the head during one of their more violent scenes, and to retaliate, Crawford wore hidden weights under her costume in a scene where Davis's character was forced to drag Crawford's character's lifeless body across the room, and she would purposely flub her lines over and over in order to have Davis redo the heavy lifting that the scene required. So a lot of incidents like that. The mix of pettiness and downright cruelty really set the tone for how the film was received by audiences, because the real life rivalry was baked into the fictional rivalry of the plot. And that's part of what is so important about this film, and how you can't really really appreciate the full scope of it until you know that, even though it does
Hmm.
stand on its own. So when Davis was nominated for an Academy Award for her portrayal of Baby Jane Hudson, which was pretty cool considering it was really kind of dismissed as like a B movie, Crawford made it her duty to vigorously campaign against her. And in order to exact her revenge, she asked every single actress that was nominated if she could accept their award on their behalf if they were unable to attend the ceremony. Anne Bancroft, who was nominated for The Miracle Worker, could not attend and actually won that night, and Crawford accepted her award. And if you watch the acceptance, she's pretty clearly elated that she got to be on stage at the Oscars and not Betty Davis. So they tried to kind of recapture the magic a few years later with the film Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, which Joan Crawford eventually was written out. She was just too difficult to work with. There were too many there was too much conflict. But that all of that has sort of cemented Whatever Happened to Baby Jane as a very legendary horror film. I believe I first saw it when it was on Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments back in the early aughts.
Mm.
So I was like making it my duty when I was a middle schooler to watch all of the films on that list. So that was one of them, and it's still fucking scary. So let's get into it. Let's start. Can you start us off with how this movie begins?
Sure. I just wanted to make a note. I love that we were both these weird middle schoolers, like running around with the affects of these like Hollywood actresses in their 50s.
I could not wait to be like a crone.
I mean, still goals.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I want.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So the movie. So it begins like it's all black and white, and it begins with a plate that just says 1917. And it basically where we enter in on a vaudeville stage. Actually, the very opening scene has nothing to do with the plot, and I just think it's really funny and creepy. The first image we see is like a crying child looking at a clown doll that also is crying.
Yeah, the clown has like a tear falling down it. I mean, I just couldn't help but think of like any kind of like symbology of the crying clown. And I mean, that really fits with the whole movie too, because it's funny and sad. So it's, I mean, and Baby Jane is like a sad clown, you know, like she is got almost clownish makeup and, you know, is putting on a front of being this like, you know, happy-go-lucky girl, but it's like deranged. So yeah, I just thought I was like, there has to be a reason they included this clown crying at the beginning. And then Baby Jane performs for an audience. She's a vaudeville performer, while Blanche, her sister, kind of sulks off stage. What is Baby Jane's act, Lizanne?
Oh my God. Yeah, so she's probably maybe 5 or 6, do we think, in this?
I think so, or maybe even 7.
Yeah, but like, so this little girl on stage and she's singing, and her father is accompanying her on piano, and so she's kind of singing just like schlocky songs of the times, but there's this whole audience of moms and their kids that are there to see her. And you know, we come in on when everyone is clapping and they're like, encore, encore, and then this little boy stands up and you're like, is he like an audience plant or like what? But he stands up and he's like, I've written a letter to Daddy, which is like the name of, I guess, her hit
song.
Her hit song. And so then she sings this song. It's so creepy.
Yeah, it's very kinky and creepy.
Yeah, it's like this little girl talking about writing a letter to her dead father.
Mm-hmm. Instead of a stamp, I put kisses. The address is heaven above. It's really fucked up.
It's so fucked. But like the audience is eating it up. They love it. Just love it. And then at some point, like her dad gets up and then she's dancing on the stage with her father, and
it's gross.
It's gross. Yeah. But we're supposed to be like, oh, it's just so heartwarming and family friendly. Family friendly stuff is
perverted.
I'm like, do they even know what they're doing?
Yeah, it's gross. Yeah, it's not here for it. Even I have in the note, I know now it's her dad, but I forgot when I was watching the movie. I was like, ew, is that her dad? Yeah, it's pretty creepy. We already you talked a little bit about in your notes, the juxtaposition of the two girls, of Blanche and Jane. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Jane has like the blonde curls and she's in her like pretty frilly white dress, and then Blanche is like plain and brunette and straight hair with bangs, and she's wearing a plain dress, and she's just off in the wings watching her sister on stage.
Hollywood loves like pitting a blonde against a brunette. Those are
Yeah.
the only two women that exist are white women, and one has blonde hair and one has brown hair. They love
Yeah.
that. And
Mhm.
Mom and Blanche are obviously kind of bonded, whereas Daddy and Baby Jane are more bonded.
Mhm.
And Jane is a huge brat already.
Oh yeah.
And Blanche is kind of already plotting her revenge.
Oof. Yeah. So it kind of wraps up when, all the audience are waiting at the stage door, wanting to maybe get an autograph from Jane or something. But, Jane bursts out the side door with her father and immediately is like, I want ice cream. I want this. I want that. And is just like throwing this tantrum in front of everybody. And even at some point screams, I make the money so I can have what I want. Which also, she's kind of not wrong.
I mean, yeah, I kind of stan her. I mean, she's, her mom, and then the mom says to Blanche, I hope that you will be nicer to your sister than she was to you when you get older. Please don't forget, like what she did for you. And
Yeah.
Blanche is like,
Oh my
I
God.
won't forget. You bet I won't forget.
I know, and that's our first moment where we're like, is this one evil too?
Right, exactly. I mean, the other thing is in the beginning of this, you sort of just get like Baby Jane is a brat, but she's not particularly terrible to Blanche or anything, and you sort of get the idea that Blanche, it's not just that Baby Jane is a brat, it's that she's jealous of her and her success. So now it's 1935, we're the Hollywood movie lots, and these movie executives are watching a Baby Jane Hudson film, so she's got to be like in her early 20s now, and they hate it. But Bette Davis looks gorgeous in this in this footage.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is really funny too. I did have to look up the movies because I was like, she looks gorgeous, and like I don't think these are especially bad, but whatever. But it turned out that the movies that they're watching, it's actually clips from both The Parachute Jumper and Ex-Lady, which were both made in 1933, that Davis made in 1933. And so they were early films when she was still being kind of pushed as like glamour girl. And she hated both of those films. And she thought that they were just pap. So I kind of liked that they used movies that Davis herself hated.
I liked that too, yeah, because she wasn't successful until later, and then the execs, right? They're talking about how Jane is awful, but what is it? What is it in Blanche's contract though?
Oh yeah, so that in Blanche's contract, it's that for every movie Blanche makes, Jane must be given another movie. So so one can't make a movie without the other one.
Yeah, so it's extremely codependent already. And the executives say that Blanche is incredibly successful, and there's really no reason for her to carry her sister around. And then one of them says, but she's never going to forget those early years and what her sister did for her. So
yeah, and we're like, is that really it? Okay.
Right. Yeah. And then there's also hinting at the executives talking about how Jane is an alcoholic. And yeah, I don't know. This just like kind of resonated with me because I was like, this is a very like toxic relationship on both ends here. And then we kind of move into the incident. So
Oh, well, they do. I think that there's like even a little foreshadowing here that the studio execs are like, "Oh, this big car taking
mm,
up this parking space. Like, who the hell is this?" And they're like, "Oh, that's Blanche's big car." And then they start talking about the Blanche is hosting another wild party that they're all going to go to, and she's starting renovations on some mansion that she just bought from that belonged to Valentino. And I love how, like, just throughout Valentino is often used as a reference point for like the epitome of old Hollywood glamour. Like he's also referenced in Sunset Boulevard. Um, yeah, so I just think that that's like
right.
a funny little note that whenever that in movies when they people want to evoke a certain glamour, a lot of times they'll reference Valentino, which they do here. So
Yeah,
this was a
yeah.
little,
That Valentino is like dancing on tango on the tile floor, Norma Desmond says,
mhm,
in Sunset
yeah,
Boulevard. Yeah, that movie is very much in conversation with this movie.
yeah,
And then we get to the incident.
yeah. So then we cut to the car pulling up to a driveway gate, and one person in fancy dress gets out to open the gate. And then the car revs the engine and screams are heard, and you don't really know what's going on. And then the opening credits roll over a still of a car smashed into the gate, and a broken Baby Jane doll is in the driveway.
Oh, and you also
Which
said,
also
why the
I'm
fuck did they have a baby Jane doll with them at the party?
well, yeah, I was also like, oh, so we forgot to mention, but when Baby Jane was on vaudeville, they were like selling
Oh,
life-size
yeah, that's
Baby Jane
important.
dolls.
Yeah, they were so in the
Yeah,
vaudeville act, they're selling these life-size baby Jane dolls that are very creepy, and they're only $3.25. But
yeah, and you could take your very own Baby Jane home with you.
yes, and that doll is used a lot throughout the film. Yeah, so there's
Yeah.
this like cracked baby Jane doll in the driveway. I don't really have a lot of notes about the credits, except it says music by Duvall. And I was like, Whoomst? Who is Duvall? And I didn't actually have time to look it up, but I did like a cursory search and it looks like I'm gonna have to look into it more. But I just was like, who the hell
Yeah.
is this gay person? So now we get to yesterday.
Yeah. So I also love that they don't date it when it's supposed to be like present day. It just says yesterday. So it's like Los Angeles and a well-off suburb, which, was made in 1962. But I think that the fact that there's no date kind of offers that this film could be happening in your neighborhood no matter what year it is, right? So it wants you to think about what kind of psychodrama is playing out in the house next door. Like,
Absolutely.
it makes it creepier. And like we all, there's always like some kind of wacky ass person in the neighborhood where you're like, what is up with them? They just seem really weird and creepy. So this movie like really invites you to like think about all of the madness that is going on behind those doors.
Yes, and it really like there's this like cheery music and there's this suburban housewife watching old movie on a TV and her teen daughter comes in and that was actually Betty Davis's real daughter, B.D. Davis,
Mm-hmm.
who would later write a scathing book about her mother, which her mother would disown her over and they would never speak again.
Mm-hmm.
Very sad. Tell us about the film that's playing on TV.
Yeah, so then this one is also an actual film that Crawford made in 1934 called Sadie McKee. And it also stars Gene Raymond and also Francho Tone. Remember him from the little ruckus about maybe what started Crawford and Davis going,
Mm-hmm.
having bad feelings about each other all the way back in the 30s. And this movie is the kind of romantic drama that Crawford is really known for. And yeah, it is a film that she loved and got really a lot of acclaim for being a quote like woman's film, right? So it was still like categorized in that way, but it was like the best of that genre.
Yeah, so the wife is watching, the housewife is watching this on TV, and the teen daughter comes in, and they kind of, that prompts them to gossip about Blanche and Jane, their neighbors, and why they live the way they do, neatly setting up the plot for us. Basically that they say that they're these two older women who live a very reclusive existence. And baby Jane seems like a weirdo, and no one ever sees Blanche. So we now meet Blanche, and she's like watching her own film and critiquing it. She's in a wheelchair. She's in this small.
She's still very glamorous.
Oh, very beautiful. Yeah. And she's in this like kind of isolated room. And Jane is sulking away downstairs, and this is the first time we see the eponymous Baby Jane. Like the real Baby Jane, not the child Baby Jane, but the Baby Jane that we know, who's played by Bette Davis. So this is very iconic horror history. Can you describe to me how Baby Jane looks?
Oh yeah, so she is kind of wearing this older style dress, which makes her look kind of frumpy. And she has, the way she's holding herself, she's kind of slouched over. And when she is moving about the house, she kind of shuffles around and always has this kind of like grimace on her face. So already she's really playing up kind of being like, like old and dowdy and just kind of slamming around, like she's like obviously not a summer child,
Right.
as I would say, right?
And not only that, but she looks completely unhinged. Like, she's got this crazy curly blonde wig on that she was wearing when she was a little kid, and her vaudeville act. She's got like crazy cakey makeup with like a fake beauty mark. She's an old woman wearing a little girl's outfit, and it looks really creepy. So immediately, like, Blanche is this sympathetic, sweet woman in a wheelchair, Baby Jane is crazy and ugly.
Yeah.
So,
but then also there's this question of like, what is keeping these sisters enmeshed
right.
in each other's lives?
Right. Yeah, and like at first when you don't know, you're kind of just like, okay, they're in like this toxic cycle where now, Baby Jane has to take care of her sister because she's disabled. Because that's what they've always done. They've always sort of begrudgingly taken care of each other. So Jane comes upstairs to torment Blanche. She like turns off the TV that Blanche is watching her own movie on, and she tells her she's an idiot. This is when you notice that Blanche has this large bird cage with a parakeet in the room. Like very obvious symbolism, like a bird in a cage. I also want to talk a bit about the house itself, because the house is very like Sunset Boulevard. It's very like dilapidated but really beautiful too. LA home. There's a lot of tile. It's very old fashioned though. It like looks like it's from the 30s, not the 60s.
exactly. It looks like it has not been updated in a few decades, and it's, yeah, some sort of like crumbling glamour, kind of surrounded by more, shiny 60s, uh, suburban architecture.
Yeah, so they really stand out in the neighborhood. So the housewife from next door comes over with fresh flowers for Blanche. Jane is obviously very pissed off and jealous, and we see from this interaction immediately that Jane keeps Blanche very isolated and won't let people meet her, even though Blanche would love to meet a fan. We also see that there's a system in the house where Blanche buzzes and Jane brings her food on a tray. So they're not doing that well because they don't have people to do that for them. So Blanche asks about visitors when baby Jane brings her this tray and is obviously like very desperate to interact with people, and Jane just mocks her like she's just so cruel. We immediately start sympathizing with Blanche because Jane is so crazy. So Blanche reminisces. Jane turns it back to her and her career and her failures. She's just like a raging wounded addict type.
Yeah, and really just dragging the energy down no matter where she is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so then she grabs the bird cage from Blanche's room, and then she says, "Well, I'm gonna go clean the cage." And we're like, okay. And then also at this time we meet Elvira, who is played by Maddie Norman. Is it Maddie?
I think it's Maddie. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Maddie Norman, who is a Black woman who comes to clean the house a few days a week. She is one of 2 Black people in the entire script that has speaking lines, and she is the only person who gets murdered in the film.
Yes, indeed. And I was watching the movie Spider Baby with my patrons last weekend, and that's from 1967, so it's around the same time period. And there's one Black actor in that film, and he is murdered as well right at the beginning of the movie. So there's this trope. These are like, I would characterize these as early horror films. Of course, they're not as early as like silent horror films, but this is like really the sort of the beginning of the and then of course there's all kinds of like atomic horror from the 50s, and I'm sure that the trope of the Black actor dying started before this, but I was just kind of noting how we see this trope of the Black character murdered in a horror film even as early as the 1960s, and I'm sure it was happening even earlier, even though I can't think of an example off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, I would also say that these kind of count as like the beginnings of like more modern horror. Yeah, and definitely, especially these are films when we start to see more integration between white characters and Black characters, right? And so it's just shitty that they're like, oh, they're finally getting a speaking role and like are portrayed more as like full people. Oh, but we're just gonna kill them then.
Right. Yeah. And she dies. Like, Elvira does have like a good, robust part in this movie, but yeah, she still gets murdered. Spoiler if you guys haven't seen whatever happened to baby Jane. I just like to make fun of people who care about spoilers.
I was like, does it count as a spoiler if the movie's been out for like 60 years?
I mean, some fucking freak on Twitter would tell you it is, but I don't know if like anyone normal thinks that. But that's most of my social interaction these days because of COVID. So I definitely think that because Elvira and Blanche start talking about selling the house and that Jane is going to react badly, and Elvira says she's sick and she's not getting any better, and Dr. Shelby is brought up, And I definitely think, you know, she's an addict, and this is like the discreet 1960s way of talking about it. So
yeah, I like that you pointed that out, because I definitely still was like, there's this vague sickness, and I'm
Right.
like, what are they diagnosing her with? Like, what is going on? It's
yeah,
so
and I think
vague.
they're like concerned about her drinking, and also the fact that she's like so arrested development. So, you know, they're like, they don't know what it is, but they're like, something's going on. They just really don't have like the contemporary language for it. So Elvira clearly has like her own relationship with Blanche and dislikes Jane very strongly. And
I love how they like glare at each other every time they pass each other in the
yeah,
hallway.
yes. And Elvira shows Blanche that Jane has been going through her mail. She's really like the voice of reason here, and she can't fathom that Blanche isn't more upset at Jane's behavior, which is very telling. Like you said, we're like, why are they so enmeshed?
Blanche is such an enabler.
Yes, exactly. She's a huge enabler, and she has a ton of guilt and like her own bullshit, her own like codependent bullshit. And Elvira's just like, I don't know how much longer I can watch this. So Blanche asks Elvira if she thinks Jane is getting worse because she knows that she's selling the house. And Blanche also reminisces about how Jane used to be. And I think they're both stuck in the past in their own way. That's why she excuses so much of her sister's actions, like not only her own guilt, but like she's holding on to this idea of her as this vibrant young girl that, you know, had this career in front of her. Wow, what a movie.
Woo!
Yeah. So thank you so much. I'm so glad we got to talk about this finally.
Oh my God. Yeah.
What a
Absolutely.
delight.
This is like, yeah, hands down one of my favorite films, and, you know, always happy to talk with another perverted Leatherdyke just about all of the weird inspirations that we've had in this lifetime.
Absolutely. It was super fun. You know, if anybody feels inspired by our conversation about Baby Jane roleplay, please tell me. I would love to hear about that. I really think there's a lot of potential here. And
Oh, yeah.
Lizanne, if you want people to, where could they find you on social media?
Oh, yeah. So I am on Twitter, just at Lizanne, LIZXNN. So that one's pretty easy. And I'm also on Instagram at fem_disaster. Instagram is usually where I will post like when I'm teaching or if I have events coming up that I'm doing.
Cool. And you know where to find me, Girls Guts Giallo on Twitter and Instagram. I don't have a personal Instagram anymore. I was deleted. So you can just find me at Girls Guts Giallo wherever you, and you know where you can listen to me wherever you pod. You're listening to this. You don't need that. And please follow my Patreon at patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. There's a lot going on over there. I'm much more active on there than I am. I only have monthly main episodes right now, but I got bonus episodes and I have screenings, and I now have a Discord server. And I also am starting a book club that's going to be on the Discord server. So
amazing. Yeah, I highly recommend the Patreon too. I love listening to all of your like extra bonus podcast episodes. Are really good to, you know, when I have computer work days. So I highly recommend that people check out Annie's Patreon.
thank you. Thank you for being so supportive. And thank you for joining me. And I will see you all next month.
Whatever happened to Baby Jane? She could dance, she could sing, make the biggest theater ring. Jane could do most anything. Whatever happened My daddy says I can be just like her. Oh, how I wish, I wish, I wish, I wish I were. Whatever happened to baby Jane? To her smile, her golden hair. Why must everything be so unfair? Is there no one left to care? What really happened to baby Jane?
Here's what happened to baby Jane. She didn't grow up, she just grew old. She was waiting for that big day that her daddy said would come. That's what happened to baby Jane. Here's what happened to baby Jane. She thought the world was at her feet. That is what her daddy said was true. But her daddy didn't always know. Your daddy doesn't always know. So for the past 40 years, her life has been nothing but tears. Her daddy said something great was to be, and she hoped and hoped and hoped and she hoped.
And that's what happened to baby Jane. To her smile, golden hair,
her golden hair.
Why must everything be so unfair? Now there's no one left to care. And that's what happened to baby Jane. And that's what happened to Jane.
What really happened to Jane?
And that's what happened to Jane.
What really happened to Jane?